Hey everyone, welcome back to the ScholarAI Founders Pod. Today we are talking DeepSeek and a bunch of other things recently updated in tech. Quick reminder to find us on all the typical podcast locations and find us on our YouTube channel. So Lakshay, I'm going to kick it over to you first. What is deep research?
Yeah, so a couple of days ago, OpenAI released something called Deep Research. This is built into ChatGPT. What it kind of allows you to do is you can give a prompt, and the sort of thing you'd expect like a longer term, like almost news journalism report to be compiled as. It will go ahead, take your prompt, understand generally what you're asking for, what sort of shape you need that information in, and it will go ahead, jump around the internet, use all of its long-term reasoning models, taking something like 10 to 16 minutes and compile for you a full report. That's the concept. Damon went ahead, and for the sake of this podcast, we kind of use that as a premise to see what we could talk about, like what's happening in AI tech news. I'd be curious, Damon, as to how you saw it did, because you were the person playing with it the most.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, I think first thing is it's very impressive. Like it does kind of exactly like what we thought a true AI agent, quote unquote, would do. So you kind of give it a task, you send it off in the background, it spins for minutes. I think the longest kind of analysis I had it run was roughly 18 minutes, somewhere between 15 and 20 minutes. And it kind of comes back with this, fairly comprehensive, analysis from kind of what you asked for it. And so I had it kind of summarize the recent updates in technology, and that kind of span from the kind of very obvious, which is Stargate and these kind of massive AI investments, all the way down to some things that I thought were fairly interesting, which was like some recent mergers and acquisitions in like biopharma, as an example, some new non-opioid um, painkillers, right? Which maybe have a massive impact on people dealing with pain management or those kind of things. And so I think kind of again, just overall impressed with the breadth of this and kind of the thoroughness at which it kind of really tried to answer my questions. Also, I think probably because of the influence of DeepSeek and otherwise, OpenAI has kind of gone the extra mile in allowing users to kind of peer under the hood a little bit with what this model's doing. So not only does it kind of outline its chain of thought of, okay, Damon as a user is asking for X, and in order to accomplish X, I'm going to go through these steps. But it also kind of gives you a running ledger, if you will, of the steps it's taking. So it's going out and sourcing information from Reuters, or it's going out and searching Wikipedia, or it's going out and searching, the New York Times or this scientific journal, or kind of whatever the case is. I tried it a couple of different things. I tried it kind of like high level. I think people that listen to this podcast know I do science, so I had it asking about a couple of scientific concepts to see if it could get around some of the paywalls. That that's a concern that we've had many times with our scientific tool is authors who would have access to these journals can't access the full text of those articles with the large language models because of paywalls, et cetera. Also had it doing some financial and stock analysis. Also had it doing some future prediction for the upcoming Super Bowl. So very topical. Very happy to kind of go into any of that. I will say I found some critical shortcomings of it. So happy to launch into there, but we'll give Shashi a time to react to any of that.
Let's talk about why Google's deep research and now OpenAI's deep research matter. They use a lot more tokens. They're going to use a lot more energy and compute time, and they're going to create a more finished product. Why does that matter? Right now, analyst jobs, data entry jobs, paralegal jobs, these are all they're still jobs that humans do, and they can use AI to augment their jobs if they're savvy. Many people in those industries are not even using AI, but those that are savvy are using AI tools to help them do their job more effectively. A tool like deep research, and maybe not even this iteration, maybe 2 iterations from now, will do the job that those humans are doing better than they could possibly do them. And so the trajectory we're on is job displacement, and deep research is an early entree in seeing how that job displacement is going to happen, what AI needs to do, meaning larger context windows, more compute time, and fundamentally more cost that goes into searching the web, traversing down a series of links iteratively. All of those things are going to create increased compute cost, but it's going to result in a better AI product that more clearly and obviously displaces the need for human analysts. Analysts at companies like Deloitte and Accenture, these are jobs that will obviously be center of the bullseye, their customers aren't going to need them for many of those current jobs. They're going to be able to use a tool, maybe not this iteration of deep research, but a couple from now, to easily do the work of those people. That labor cost will translate into a cost for the OpenAI or Google Gemini subscription provider.
I think one thing that I have, for the record, I haven't yet played with this thing. Like, we got the subscription and I haven't tried it, at least. Um, the thing that I have heard generally, so Google also announced Gemini Flash. That's a thing that happened this week. I imagine we'll talk about it a little bit later. But just fundamentally with these models, the thing that they can't do super well is getting like more structured content out in the correct shape. So if we were to say, like, I need deep research to go read a bunch of FTC filings, I want to read like investment reports, the thing that like it's kind of prone to messing up is, what the hell does this table say, right? The semantic model will look at this table, try to just garner like, that's a table, looks like line goes up. I'll throw some numbers in there because there's probably numbers in there from what I can see. And it can mess up the details really, really easily. So I think for right now, my assumption, again, without having played with it, is that these tools, like these deep research tools, they aren't going to be able to get you quantitative stuff yet. Qualitative reporting feels trivial. Like if you're just reading off the web and reading like raw text from New York Times or whatever it may be, no problem. But if you're going to have to go to a quantitative job, which has like data that comes into its role, I think that's further away.
Yeah, that's matched my lived experience too. And again, I've only been playing with these tools for, going on 72 hours now, and these things are obviously brand new. And I think as of this morning, it was just now released to the entirety of pro users. But you said it correctly, in both the ingest and the output of anything that is non-text based, it just really struggles with still. And I'll even go further to say one of the critical shortcomings that I identified pretty easily was it sometimes got lazy in its citation of sources, which we know has been a crux, or kind of a Achilles heel of these large language models for the duration of their existence, essentially. But instead of sometimes pointing to a web page, it would give you a dead link, or it may just default to, rather than giving you the actual article on Reuters, it would just give you Reuters.com, right? Or like Bloomberg.com versus the actual article, which is, not really all that useful. Touching on your point, Josh, I think you're correct in saying that there will be job. I want to be careful not to use the word displacement. I don't know that it will be displacement so much as it will be shuffling, meaning I don't think that humans will continue to do the things that they've done, especially in the professions that you kind of correctly identified there, like any sort of analyst, market research, etc. Financial, whatever. That said, these things still need a good deal of babysitting. They're still very prone to being more or less effective based on the kind of influence of the prompt and how you can kind of help guide it down a path. So I do think, similar to how we saw, these kind of technological trends have played out throughout history, I think you're going to have the same number, or probably even more people working with these AI tools, such that, some of the reports that we're seeing out of, like, the Y Combinators and folks that kind of really invest in these things heavily, is that they're seeing more demand for engineers to work on these systems. And granted, some of those are in AI research rather than less, which I think that when we start thinking about what large language models are good at, it's analysis and it's coding. So I think, to me at least, the jury is still out whether or not we're going to see a job reduction in this, or if we're just going to get a dramatic shift of what used to be a job that was primarily at the keyboard, searching the internet and compiling a report into a Word doc or a PowerPoint, now becomes doing the same thing, but using AI to do it as your thought partner, as your kind of round the clock, surveillance machine.
We used to have this agreement as a society that you would grind through school, you'd memorize a bunch of nonsense that you're never going to use. You would get through your tests, you would get good scores in exams, you'd get into a school, hopefully a good college, you'd get degrees, and that would set you up for a successful career, a successful life. That is dissipating. That is no longer how the job market is operating anymore, and that pace is going to accelerate. And so what we're seeing is that the name on your degree doesn't really matter. people who have advanced degrees, masters, PhDs, some of them are struggling to find jobs in this market. There is a massive change happening in labor market criteria. So let's talk about some jobs that are not going to be displaced. If you're a tradesperson, if you're a plumber, electrician, if you do flooring and roofing, that stuff is not in the realm of what AI is going to do. Now we could talk about robotics later, but there's going to be some delay between the revolution of AI and the introduction of robotics into everything. For what we're talking about now, the visible future, AI is not displacing those hands-on trades. It will displace non-top level jobs. So if you're a paralegal and you work in a law firm and you support 2 or 3 lawyers with a bunch of administrative tasks, AI is there are too many smart people working to solve your job and replace your job with technology that it's not going to happen. We can argue about whether that's a year or 2 or 3, but there are so many. You mentioned Y Combinator, and Y Combinator is just one piece of that puzzle. There are many, many companies out there trying to displace every one of these non-top jobs that it's inevitably going to happen. So what you're describing, Damon, is I think in a way a wishful thinking scenario that these people are going to re-educate themselves to operate in a different way. I think many people are not equipped or ready for that kind of complete re-education to do a different job or to do their job in an entirely different way. I'm not seeing that kind of adaptability in the market, in the labor market. So some other jobs that won't be displaced, jobs that require a lot of hands-on work with other human beings. Those feel like difficult to replace. Creative jobs, artist jobs. We have AI tools that will help with art, but ultimately art is about taste and human preference. And if you see 2 paintings and one you were told was created by AI and one was by human, there's inherently more value, more intrinsic value in the art created by the human. So that's my view. I think it's a bit wishful thinking that the entire labor market will adapt that quickly.
I mean, there's a part of this that's to me just like ChatGPT has existed for 2 or 3 years. And I think there's also an element to this, which is I think what I see is that like the top 10% of productive people who found this thing and are able to use it are having outsized effect on how they perform at their job, how much they're able to get done, that sort of thing. But the kind of like majority truth, I think in a lot of cases that like the simple education of what you can do with this stuff isn't generally there, right? There was not to hop too many topics, but I think the first instance of a university program rolling out ChatGPT EDU to the entire student body as like the professors can make custom GPTs and students can go ahead and use those, right? We're a little bit out of cycle in that there are probably undergrad students right now who are like LLM native users, right? Their productivity tool is not a Google Drive. It's not a Microsoft Word. Their productivity tool is what ChatGPT is. And I think it's the biggest thing that's going to make it take a while for that influence to spread across the market is how long it takes for that education to reach the workforce. At least in my experience, it's felt like the typical person is not aware of what you can do with this stuff. And we're immersed in this space, right? But the typical person has not heard of deep research or knows what O3 mini is or has any reason to care about what a reasoning model is. And that's just so far away that the people who are aware will probably get very, very ahead. The people who aren't will be lagging for a couple of years until they're like virally made aware of the things you can pull off with this thing.
I just think that most of these technology shifts, and your points are well taken, Chashi, but most of these things manifest in ways that are difficult to predict. And like take the paralegal example, and if we wanted to forecast what does that job shift look like in a world that is AI native, and the duties that that person was fulfilling on a daily basis are no longer necessary, you could imagine data labeler, right, workflow optimizer, those kind of things, where it's like you're actually just doing the things that you were doing before, but instead of doing them for kind of a senior executive or something, you're doing them to train the AI workflow for your interfirm practice or your interfirm practice. Like I think that you're correct in saying that the jobs that are currently exist will be kind of displaced in a manner of speaking. But I don't know that I believe fully that we're going to see a precipitous decline in the number of employees. For example, yes, there are going to be people on the edges that kind of lose their job because the core competency they currently have is no longer required or necessary. I think that is inevitable. But I think it's difficult for me to fathom that this transition will be larger than the transition from humans being primarily farmers as the primary occupation to the primary occupation being white collar desk jobs, right? And so, like, I just don't know how those two things translate. And maybe I am wrong, and we end up with you know unemployment rates at which we've kind of never seen. But I guess I'll hold out optimism, like you said, that isn't really going to be the case.
Yeah, I just think there's a lot of inertia. The thing I feel like I view in general is that like the companies that cause these sort of like macro level changes, right? The way that Google operates, the way Goldman Sachs operates, whatever kind of determines the industry trend for what happens and spreads out to medium and smaller size businesses. I think there's just so much incumbency dependence, right? The thing that I look at is Cursor has been a thing for something like a year and a half now. Great product, really, really useful, changes the game, all that sort of stuff. But companies like working with GitHub because Microsoft is a more known entity. And it's taken Microsoft all of those 1.5 years to finally come up with their answer to the agentic problem, right? It's that's going to take like so long to just like bleed out into actual the startups of the world who are trying to change a lot of things can make a big dent at like from the bottom level up, but the macro level changes happens from the top down, and those top down people are just so slow.
I saw these X posts on X.com about people comparing Cursor and Windsurf and kind of pros and cons and like different ways of using those two tools. And then like fourth or fifth in the comments is like some dude that's like, "Hey, how about Microsoft GitHub Copilot? Like, can we get this in the comparison?" And everyone's like, "Oh God,
It's so terrible. I tried it once after like a
me
full
too.
like
It's so
half
bad,
year of coding with Cursor. Microsoft Copilot, it's awful. It's
so
crazy.
bad."
Like
That's
that's the
not to say
thing.
Cursor is great, right? Like,
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
I go in
absolutely.
circles with Cursor and get really frustrated that like, I mean, I must be running out of like my fast queries or high context queries or whatever. And then I get to a point where it's just like it's trying to do the same thing over and over in a really bad way, and then
Yeah.
deleting the thing it did 5 minutes ago. And like, clearly, I've like exhausted your query count, and you've stuck me on the crappy model.
hmm The thing that happened to me recently is with Cursor, I so while building a product like we use a front library that cares that like the code is written in a certain way. And so instead of me going ahead and caring that like, oh, as the code is being written, I'm going to go back and fix all these like errors in compilation. Once my feature is done, I know it's generally working, I'll go to Cursor and I say like, run this command, fix the issue you see, and loop until done. And I just kind of let it go and do its thing because I generally was trusting it. I pushed my code up, merged it to main, was testing in prod the night before I wanted to launch the thing, and my feature was gone. And I was looking at the logs. I was like, no, I think the thing we should do to fix your feature and the typing error is just replace your entire implementation. Which is like,
Oh my God.
why?
Me too.
Why?
I had a database. It was like I was using Supabase, and it's like,
Yeah.
oh no, I'm just gonna make a new database. I'm gonna use Postgres on local and like do everything local and just make a whole new schema. Like, no, I had a schema. Like, just use the thing.
Out of curiosity for both of you, because these are not tools that I've used in my coding workflow. Most of mine is just dialogue with Claude or like O1 Mini as an example in the ChatGPT interface. Why do you think that is? Why do you think those experiences? Do you think it is the lack of context? Do you think it's just simply that you're trying to do something slightly outside of the mainstream? Like why is it getting these things kind of hilariously wrong in certain instances?
When I think of like when we started Scholar AI, it was to alleviate some of the obvious shortcomings of ChatGPT at the time and provide validated references and real papers, not hallucinated papers. And it sort of feels like now that game is like moved to Cursor, where Cursor does all these obviously stupid things sometimes, and the game is like optimizing your use of Cursor, and then Cursor will get better, like, so some company will spend a whole lot of cycles trying to write code to solve all those problems the Cursor's getting wrong, and then Cursor will get better in the next iteration, and all those companies will just be wiped because the code that they spent all that time writing is now trash, essentially. So it feels like that game, and we don't want to play that game. Like we don't want to build like cursor side tools to improve the edge functionality of cursor, but somebody will, and then cursor will make a better version. So I think I'm kind of just holding out hope for better models and improvements in cursor. I'll probably try Windsurf just to like, I don't know, see if I have a better overall experience. But yeah.
Yeah, but I think that gets at the core of like why I look at what's happening with AI is just generally such a slow thing. Where like you and I, Shashi, like we're technical by background. We can generally know like what is a bad choice that it's making. But like an AI native like market, an AI native like economy doesn't generally have that awareness, right? If I were to dump deep research on someone and say like, hey, can we go ahead and like print out my like stock report so I can turn this to my manager and my big consulting firm will have reports about how you save your business, and it's getting like tables wrong and someone isn't aware of how to catch that, then it's not an effective product yet. That would be reason to be like, oh, we can't keep using deep research. Just do this manually. We can only trust if it's manual. And that gets pushed off another year until some bigger model solves that problem.
Yeah,
I've heard of these. Okay, so I'm curious about your take on this. Okay, so I've heard about PE, private equity companies going in and buying traditional businesses and then doing this exact thing that you're describing, which is basically like retrofitting the organization with AI, with sometimes different staff who are already kind of trained to use tools, rather than trying to get the legacy people to incorporate new tools, which in many cases that's very hard to do.
Yeah,
I'm curious of your take. Do you think that approach works, or do you feel like it's doomed to failure in some way?
I think it's really smart. I think the problem you run into is just like deal flow. Like you need like, I imagine, quite a bit of experience and like enough cycles of trying this like AI retrofitting thing to actually get something that's working. And ultimately, if the business you're acquiring is like profitable, you're fine. But in the case of like bringing in the right people who know how to retrofit a thing and actually getting it up to the accuracy standard that's needed, I think a lot of these companies are just praying for the next model to any AI startup is praying for the next model to solve all their problems. Because ultimately there's just like so much that's like so context specific that, again, like a financial report, getting the table correct is a really hard thing to do. Like getting the decimal point in the right spot is a really tough thing for an LLM like visual model to do, right? But that's something that could like blow up the entire capacity for that like transaction or system to work. I think if you go into something qualitative, like if you go into like again, I think like all these companies that do like offshoring work, like trying to improve like I guess like turn around very simple work products for bigger clients. I think there you can do a lot of stuff. I think there's a lot of money to be made if you're just gonna have like a acquire and rotate in AI sort of thing. But I think looking at like the high like obvious things that like you would probably see someone apply to Y Combinator to, I think you're going to struggle a little bit.
Yeah, I think to me, it feels a little bit like trying to skate to where the puck is going, which I think generally is a smart strategy. I think that AI can't accomplish a lot of this kind of blocking and tackling that's necessary right now. But the hope is, and we're hearing this out of many groups, Y Combinator included, that we talked about a couple times now, where the next model release, all of a sudden, a bunch of things that weren't working suddenly start to work. And if you're positioned in the correct space, you have the customers, you have the workflow, you understand the processes kind of beginning to end, you can be in a really good position to then capitalize on those efficiency gains. I guess the other thing that is true still, and we talked about it briefly last week with the introduction of DeepSeek and kind of the shockwaves that sent through the capital markets, is for all the CapEx and the dollars that have been dumped into AI, so far those things aren't returning positive ROI results, right? Even from the model providers are losing money on these things. Sam Altman has been kind of widely documented as saying they're losing money on a lot of the pro subscription plans, even at $200 per month. And Microsoft and otherwise, they're not monetizing these in a way that is truly ROI positive to their bottom line yet. And I think the PE folks that you're describing are looking to do a similar thing. They're looking to scoop up those dental practices and kind of ride the long tail of efficiency gains as these AI models progress through the various stages of competency.
I'd love-